talk to me.
Yeah, okay.
Sarah, you've had your cousin has got the disease. Your father died of the disease. So I mean that must make you feel that we really need to get moving on this campaign, as Les said in the film.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think hearing the other speakers today was very interesting, particularly Professor Latchman, because as a consultant geriatrician, one of the things that really struck home to me was that actually phase 3 trials actually really don't look at real life. They look at a group of people who very often only have one illness, don't have multiple illnesses. They often exclude elderly people, and I'm a geriatrician, and actually every day I'm using drugs that haven't actually been tested specifically in elderly people because they've been excluded from phase 3 trials. And actually what Professor Latchman was saying about sort of doing away with phase 3 trials, or perhaps using phase 3 trials and looking at using drugs at an earlier stage and using the two in parallel would actually be a much more effective way of trying to assess whether drugs are useful or not, because you're actually looking at them in real life, which you really don't in a phase 3 trial.
So really, you would very much support that we need to change the legislation so that we can move to actually treating people with drugs that have reached the end of phase 2.
Very much so, yeah.
Okay. So, what part do you think that? I'm just trying to think of another question.
Sorry, the question that you just, the comment that summary you just made. Sarah needs to repeat the summary. Put in your own words.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you could just put into your own words why you think the ability to be able to use drugs that have finished phase 2 is so important.
I think because it means that people will get access to the drugs
Sorry,
earlier.
you need to say what?
You need to say it.
So I need to say, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
So what do I need to say?
This is because my voice won't be on tape,
Yeah,
so
okay.
you need to say we need to be able to use drugs at the end of phase 2 or through the process.
Okay, we need to be able to use drugs at the end of phase 2.
Okay, and in your experience as a geriatrician, that you're using drugs already that have been through phase 3, but you think they would be ready to use at the end of phase 2?
So as a geriatrician, what you're doing is you're extrapolating the evidence from trials which have very often been done in young people with a single illness into using them in elderly people who haven't actually been included in the trial with multiple comorbidities. And that's actually accepted as practice that is fine. Even though in effect those drugs haven't been tested in that patient group, or there's only been a very small patient group that would be considered to be elderly or very elderly, or maybe no very elderly people at all.
But as a clinician, do you think, or as a doctor, you're treating patients every day, do you think that actually having the flexibility and freedom to be able to use drugs in a kind of experimental sense, almost sometimes, particularly in older people who may not have long to live anyway, is that something, a kind of freedom that you would like to have?
I think it would be a freedom that would
Sorry, what's the freedom? You need to repeat it back.
Sorry, it's difficult.
Yeah.
The freedom to use drugs.
I know that I'm really bad at doing this.
No, you're really good. You look great on camera. Better than Simon.
I'm not on camera.
What is it that I've got to repeat? Sorry.
But you were saying, that you're using drugs. It seemed to me that you're using drugs that haven't been tried
in older people.
But
it's accepted. It's
accepted practice.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just think that the whole principle of clinical testing should be changed, so that that the drug regime is not only shorter, but is a bit more is tested on a wider variety of people. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it needs to be. They need to be tested on a wide. Well, no, I think Professor Professor Latchman's point that at the end of phase 2, we're fairly certain that things are safe, and that in post-marketing surveillance is often the time that you identify sort of the rarer side effects of a drug, that almost phase 3 becomes irrelevant, because actually you're not testing it in the patient group that is most likely to have the illness, which for most illnesses, the most common illnesses, are actually the elderly group of patients.
As somebody who's suffered from two people close to you, so do you feel a bit frustrated that no further progress has been made?
It's extremely frustrating that no further progress has been made in the treatment of motor neurone disease. My father was on ridazole, as Les has been on ridazole. Les's illness has progressed more quickly than my dad's did, and has his symptoms have actually been rather different to my dad's, but we know that there's a spectrum of different ways in which motor neurone disease can present. And it is really saddening that I've actually had a colleague recently who's also died of motor neurone disease, also another young man, so although it's rare, it certainly affected me personally greatly. So I would like to see progress made.